inside your head and spirit. The soul is saying something profound, so let them hear it.
Welcome to Giant Sized Violence, a Toku Comics podcast. I'm your host, Tomi, and today we're doing something a bit different. Joining me today is someone who's a bit of a local legend around Iowa. He's an award-winning writer, editor, and videographer, but I've known him most for his acting roles in some of the best plays I've ever seen, including Let the Right One In and Evil Dead the Musical, where he played the lead role of Ash Williams. He's also been a host on the Iowa Innovators podcast for the last few years, and as far as his writing goes, he's written stage plays like The Summerlin Project, Aurora, and Driving to Bermuda, and films like Amelia 2.0, Skip Day, and the 2007 indie film masterpiece, Stray Dog. With all that said, I'd like to give a warm welcome to today's guest, Rob Merritt.
Hey, how you doing, Tommy? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Rob. How are you doing today?
I can't believe you didn't mention the indie film legend Nunsmack in that listing.
Oh, I don't think I've been exposed to Nunsmack yet. Ooh.
Oh man, that's it's sort of anytime that anybody ever starts to take me seriously as an artist, I will just point out to them that I did a movie called Nunsmack, and that usually brings everything right back to, oh, okay, you're an idiot.
Wow. Yeah, was this a film you wrote or just starring?
No, this was a movie that I acted in back in, I think it came out in 2016 or 2017. It was on Amazon Prime for a while, and then at some point I think Amazon kicked it off. And yeah, I mean it was a terrible B movie, but one of those like so bad that it's funny kind of things. Yeah, it involved a bunch of nuns running a drug ring, and you know, that's really all you need to know.
Gotcha. So Velocipaster's okay, but Nunsmack is a step too far. I see how it is.
What we need is to have is Velocipaster versus Nunsmack. I think that would be an amazing mashup movie.
Ooh, yeah. Have you seen Velocipaster?
Oh, I've not actually had the privilege of seeing the finished film. I've seen the trailer many times, and I'm just like, oh, this has the potential to be a classic right here.
I might cover it on this podcast someday, or see if I can get like the writer or director on, because like it hits all my buttons, and it's like someone was making an indie film or a student film, but they were just a really good editor and like really good with music videos, because it's like shockingly beautiful in moments, and it'll randomly have like an amazing music video. Like whoever made this was really talented. They were just set on making a stupid movie as best they could.
That sort of reminds me of, have you seen Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter?
I have.
Yeah, it's similar. Like, there are some moments of sheer genius in that film, sprinkled in with some absolutely terrible moments. But yeah, I think I fell in love with that movie the moment that the villain was watching his plans fall apart on TV from like all the coverage of everything, and he sees Jesus like basically beating the crap out of everybody, and then he turns around and Jesus is right there. And Jesus punches him in the face. And the guy's like, how could you be here? I just saw you. And Jesus says, I am everywhere. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, I love this movie. I love everything about this stupid movie.
Yeah, I found that in that golden early age of Netflix, back when you needed a disc to watch it on your Nintendo Wii, and they didn't have like anything big yet or good originals, but they had Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter, and that was a hidden nugget of gold there.
Oh man, the good old days.
But so today, Rob and I are going to be discussing another film with a bit of a weird reputation that we share a special connection with, Cats. And yes, I mean the 2019 Release the Butthole Cut film, Cats. We'll be comparing it with another often maligned movie, more familiar to the fans of this podcast, 2021's Mortal Kombat, which may seem unrelated, but I hope you'll agree by the end of the episode that these are basically the same film. Rob, I thought you'd be the perfect guest for this episode since you were actually present at my first viewing of Cats in the theater.
I was.
Yeah, and I know you were able to turn that into a semi-viral experience of sorts. Could you tell us a bit about your history with the film?
Yeah, I went with a group of friends to see it. You were amongst them. I think it wasn't on opening day, but it was within a couple of days of when the film had opened, and it was. We knew kind of going in, like already the reviews that were coming out of that movie were that it left some things to be desired. So we kind of knew, but we were like, oh, let's just go see what it's like. And it wound up being such a surreal experience that I wound up actually taking notes as it went along so that I could then share a post after we got out just about the experience of seeing Cats and just how completely batshit crazy it was. And I wrote this later on, and it wound up, it was weird. I remember I wrote it, and I think like for the first couple of days after I'd written it, it just like I wrote it to make a few friends laugh, and we're like, aha. And then I woke up one morning, and all of a sudden it said that it had been reshared. I think at that point it was like, oh, your post got reshared 7,000 times last night. And I'm like, what? And then over the next couple of days, it just like kept blowing up. It was really weird, and other websites were picking it up and reprinting it, and reposting it, I should say. I just dated myself there. But yeah, it was just weird because it was just I tried to just write a comedic reaction to seeing that film, and I remember even writing in that review, although there were a bunch of things that I poked fun at. I also wrote at the end, I gotta salute the filmmakers just for being willing to make something that is just so balls to the wall crazy. I mean, it takes some guts to do that, and it was and I remember, I think the version that we saw, I don't think it was finished, because I know they made like multiple patches to it in the theater. They were sending new versions because they started to realize they'd rushed it to be finished, and there were still actors that were in there was like blue screen stuff that was still in it, and sometimes you could still see actors in bodysuits because they hadn't been colored over. And I think the version we saw, Dame Judi Dench's, you could still see her wearing gloves, like they hadn't covered her hands with fur.
Yeah, there were a lot of hands that were just human hands, and yeah, I remember catching that one guy that's just a dude in a sweater amongst a bunch of cats of the same size.
Yeah, it was interesting. Although it was also, I've mentioned this to a few people that for me it was a very mixed thing, because it was fun to go viral accidentally with a post, but I also felt kind of bad about it, because even though I was trying to like have fun with it and and poke fun, things like that, at the end of the day I kind of realized that I was making sport of making fun of these people, and I was like, I don't really want to do that in my writing. I don't want to basically just poke fun at people for no other reason than, haha, that was dumb. I mean, as somebody who writes and tries to make films myself, you get to a point where you're like, I don't really want to make fun of other filmmakers if the point is just to be mean. I mean, if you have something insightful to say, great. But honestly, after that experience, I was like, I don't know that I really want to write like negative things about movies anymore. So Cats was actually the last critical review I wrote of anything. Since then, I'm just like, if I don't have anything nice to say about it, I'm just not going to say anything.
That's been kind of something for me in this film too, of like, I came out right away being like, oh my gosh, that was one of the worst things I've ever seen. I had made a post or two about it myself. And then like, it was 2020, it was a different time. I was still smoking weed, and like, because of the shutdown, didn't have work. So like, I had kind of made a regular habit of showing people Cats. Like, I've now seen the movie, no kidding, at least 20 times, just because, like, there's nothing else quite like it, and so many people, like, heard all the jokes and just didn't give it a chance, and I've found other people that are kind of able to appreciate it now, and I would genuinely call it, like, my favorite movie now, just because it's the movie I get the most joy out of watching. And there are a bunch of little things I've come to appreciate over time and over this many rewatches. And yeah, I wanted to have full disclosure with my audience. Like, I'm not one for chasing algorithms. Like, I hope doing a podcast that's a niche within a niche is enough evidence of that. But Netflix is going to have Cats starting tomorrow. And like, having such a famously maligned movie that's also unironically my favorite film, I feel like it'd be dumb of me not to make a little something out of it, just since this is probably the most weight in the algorithm Cats is ever gonna have again.
Now, see, I did not know that. I didn't realize it had become your favorite film. I don't think I had talked to you about it since we saw it that night. I had no idea that it had grown into this other thing for you.
Oh yeah, like, part of it is like having tried some trippy substances and seeing like, oh, there's ways you can watch this movie and the effects like kind of come around to being good again. Like there's still kind of rough, famously so, but like that's certainly helped just knowing like, oh, there's another way to watch this that like kind of saves the film. And on rewatching, I found like there's some surprisingly deep lore and like interesting world building that's just kind of subtly hinted at through the movie. There's kind of a cool power and magic system once you actually take the time to see, like, oh, they do set up how, like, Idris Elba and Mr. Mistopheles, like, how this magic system works. It's just, like, never really explained in dialogue. And
I I do remember getting the vibe when we went to see it, just from the reactions that were happening in the theater. I mean, I think the first half, people were just kind of like, what is happening? But by the second half, people were kind of like, people were actually cheering for things as they saw them on the screen, and people were talking back to characters. And I was sitting there like, oh my God, this is how Rocky Horror started.
Yeah.
And I found myself wondering, I wonder if this will start developing some weird cult following where people will go to screenings of it and like dress up as cats and throw props at the screen. Cause I mean, Rocky Horror if you watch Rocky Horror, it doesn't make, as a film, it really doesn't make much sense at all. But at the same time, I freaking love Rocky Horror because it's just so off the wall, batshit crazy. And it's fun. And I have so many good memories associated with it. I've been in, I think I've been in 5 live productions of Rocky Horror. I've played a bunch of different characters in it, and I've been to live screenings of the movie. And it's a community, and it's fun. People all have different things about that movie that they love. And I genuinely found myself wondering if Cats was going to go down that same path. And it's been a couple of years, and I haven't seen that happen. But it felt at the time like, man, this is just crazy enough that I could totally see it developing a following like that.
Yeah, I'm hoping maybe the Netflix release gives it that resurgence, since I know rowdy showings were happening around that time. Like, people did kind of capitalize on it in the moment. But I remember having that same thought of, like, is this how Rocky Horror happened? And, like, I came away feeling like it was genuinely the most fun I'd ever had in a movie theater, just being with all these other people that, like, most of us were not related or in the same group, but everyone kind of came together to, like, heckle the movie a bit, but then kind of came around and were, like, cheering for it and, like, just embraced its weirdness. And I'll never forget, there was one couple that I think was not happy about the rest of the crowd, of, like, 30 of us. And they walked out, and then a minute or two later comes in, obviously a staff member of the theater who just, like, gives us their best, like, stern mom face staring down the theater. And I could slowly see it wash over them as they realized, oh, this isn't 1 or 2 problem customers. This is everyone. I don't know how to deal with this. And they just, like, looked so defeated when they turned around and left that theater.
Yeah. It was weird. It was very surreal.
I mean, like, generally my pitch for the movie to people is, like, if you judge movies by how different they are from every other movie, rather than, I don't know, plot or character development and that nonsense, Cats is kind of one of the best movies of all time. Like, say what you want about it, but you have not seen anything else like Cats. I can almost guarantee it.
I have a question for you. Have you seen The Marvels?
Yes.
There's that sequence in it that it almost is like a little bit of a tribute to how insane the movie is when the Flurkins are eating people and they start playing Memory, and it's freaking hysterical. I mean, I remember, I saw Marvels in the theater also, and I'm just sitting there just absolutely laughing my ass off during that scene. And that was just like a little bit of the insane energy that the actual Cats movie has.
Yeah, and maybe this will be the thing that fully brings Cats back in the zeitgeist, because, like, everything that is genuinely flawed about this movie, I think, could have been saved if they had just shelved it for a little while. Like, and they almost had the perfect excuse. Like, I know they rushed it, made that unreleased cut that you cannot find anywhere, and I'm really pissed about that, because I want to see the cut we saw again. But, like, COVID was right around the corner. They could have delayed that movie and then had as much time as they wanted to fix it in post. And, like, yeah, it's not just the effects. Like, there's a lot of things, just little story editing bits, maybe cutting another 10, 20 minutes out of the movie. Like, they could have had a significantly better movie and all the time in the world to make it that if they had just not rushed it.
Well, I'm sort of curious because I saw this in the subject for this podcast, and I was like, how's that gonna work? That you're connecting this movie to Mortal Kombat, and to be clear to your listeners, I'm not in on this at all. I learned that for the first time when I signed on for this podcast, and I was like, oh, we're comparing those two. Okay, how does that work? So I will ask you, since obviously this is something you've thought about. What did Cats and Mortal Kombat? How are they related?
So, a couple years after the film came out, I'd had a small gathering of 3 or 4 friends. We were starting the night off by watching the new Mortal Kombat when it came to HBO Max, and then we were going to follow it up with Cats, as I had a habit of doing at that point. And in watching Mortal Kombat, like, I just started to notice a few threads of, like, wait a minute, these are kind of the same thing. Like, namely that the villain's plan is identical in both films. And then there's all these other little threads that kind of share things with one another. So, like, to kick things off, I think a lot of people will come away from Cats not really knowing what they just saw or what the story even necessarily was. So, like, Rob, you as a more casual Cats viewer, do you know anything about the actual story of Cats or, like, its proper plot?
Yeah. Well, bear in mind, I'm a musical theater veteran, so I was brought up on Cats on like the Broadway cast recording and the T.S. Eliot poems and all that. So by the time the movie came out, I was well aware of Cats, and I'd seen the stage production many times. And the movie is very different from the stage production. But I certainly knew the background. I knew where Andrew Lloyd Webber got the material from. Incidentally, Andrew Lloyd Webber has completely disowned the movie. But yeah, I definitely know the history of how it all came together.
Yeah, so, like, generally the plot of Cats, both the play and the musical, focus around, like, a competition that the Jellicle Cats throw on every year. And it's, like, it's played up as, like, something great that everyone's excited about, but at its heart, it's a battle to the death. Granted, a song and dance battle to the death, but they're all competing to see, like, who gets to go up in a ramshackle hot air balloon and ascend into the sky and go to their heavy side layer, which is like heaven / also rebirth. Like, they'll be reborn as a new cat. But
for what it's worth, I believe Andrew Lloyd Webber has said that, the original thing came from a bunch of different poems that were not really connected.
Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats.
I believe it was either Andrew Lloyd Webber or someone, or maybe it was Tim Rice, but one of them said that they basically locked themselves in a flat somewhere in London and did massive amounts of cocaine. And by the time they had finished this, they had actually come up with a plot outline to string all these together. So I guess it's appropriate, really, that the story of Cats, and hence the movie of Cats, was brought to us courtesy of cocaine.
Yeah, I can see its influence for sure. It seems like something written on coke. But before I fully dive into the Mortal Kombat comparisons, I know you just saw the film for the first time last night of the 2021 Mortal Kombat, and would like to get your thoughts as something of a light Mortal Kombat fan over the years.
I genuinely liked it. I've heard that it's got a nasty backlash and that a lot of people don't like it, and I genuinely enjoyed it. I remember seeing the original Mortal Kombat back in the 90s, and it was very cheeseball, and this movie felt more like what I had wished Mortal Kombat back in the 90s had been, because it took the concept seriously, and I thought that the effects were really good. The story behind Scorpion and Sub-Zero and all that I thought was done very, very well. It's also really fun to see Hiroyuki Sanada playing that character. Because I've been a fan of his. He was on the show Lost. He's like popped up in a ton of things, and he was a really good choice for that character. There were a few things plot-wise that I'm like, wait, I'm confused. I don't understand why the character of Scorpion got sent to hell after he died. They didn't really clarify that. He's like talking about how Sub-Zero trapped me here for 400 years, and I'm like, by all accounts, it seems like you're a pretty good dude, loved your family, and then you got assassinated. I don't know why you got condemned to hell, but okay, all right. Hey, if it gave you firepower and let your descendant cook everything, and yeah, all right, cool. There's definitely stuff in the movie that you just got to go with, and you're like, all right, fine. At the end of the day, this is a movie about people fighting, and this is not like deep cinema. But as long as you come into it knowing that, and it's a fun film. And I thought it was also interesting that there's really no, I mention Hiroyuki Sanada because he's like the only name actor in the whole thing. Like, most of the people that are in it are unknowns because they don't need to shell out the money for big names. Mortal Kombat sells itself. But, and it's produced by James Wan, who I really like a lot of the other stuff that James Wan has done. I would add that the movie Megan is one of my absolute guilty pleasure favorites. Freaking love that movie. So, yeah, as soon as I saw his name was attached to it, I was like, okay, this is a good sign. And yeah, I suppose if you went into that movie with massive, massive expectations, it's hard to go into any movie feeling like that and not be disappointed in some way that it's not what you wanted it to be. But I watched it with no expectations other than, oh, hey, we're going to be talking about this on the podcast. I should probably see it. And I genuinely, as a movie that I put on at 10:30 at night and like, hey, let's see what happens. I thought it was fun. I enjoyed it. And I thought the effects were well done. Blood was a little overdone. People were hitting each other with so much blood flying that I was like, yeah, okay, there would not be any blood left in them by now. But again, you kind of just have to roll with it.
Yeah.
That's Mortal Kombat. I mean, Mortal Kombat, people sustain horrific, crippling injuries and then, get right back up and deliver a combo. So, I will say I was catching a lot of little references to the game. Little things like when Liu Kang, he kept dropping Kano with just dropping down and doing the low kick, and he just kept doing it and doing it. And Kano's finally like, do you have any other moves? But he was like, well, you can't stop this one. And I was like, I remember playing Mortal Kombat, and there'd be the guy that would have, would just low kick everybody. And you were like, oh my God, I hate playing against you. So I thought that was a fun little reference that I immediately caught. And there were other little things like that here and there that just, as somebody who's played Mortal Kombat for many years, I was like, I understood that reference. Yeah, it was fun.
I could understand some of the core complaints hardcore fans had, namely that there isn't a Mortal Kombat tournament in it, or that it used an original character as the main character. So I'm like, okay, that is fair, but this had flashy fights with interesting characters, which is really the experience I want, regardless of the context of those fights. And
and I thought about that element, that, yeah, you're right, there wasn't a tournament in it, but first of all, pretty much every other Mortal Kombat movie has had a tournament, so it's not like that hasn't been done. But the other thing that I noticed they were doing was that they were, when they decided they had to divide up and go fight all of the other guys, what they did was they were all dropping into their separate worlds, which actually is just like how the game works. When you see two characters fight a match, they're usually in one of the two characters, it's in their home plane or whatever. And so it almost made more sense. I was like, so they're doing the Mortal Kombat tournament without officially doing a tournament. They're just showing up there to take these guys out. So I figured out, probably with about 20 minutes of the movie to go, oh, there's not going to be a tournament, is there? And then I was like, well, it kind of feels like they're doing one. They're just not officially calling it a tournament.
Yeah. So overall, I liked the movie. I thought it might be a little forgettable. Generally, I've seen it 2 or 3 times now, and it feels like a pretty fresh experience each time. But overall, I like it. I got what I wanted from Mortal Kombat, and I got something even more out of it with realizing, as I said, I love Cats for how different it is from every other film out there. I've just not seen anything structured like it, but Mortal Kombat, I guess, is the one common thread that I'm like, this is the same thing, just in a more palatable form for massive audiences. And starting with our main premise, as said, Cats is a song and dance battle to the death. Just people are battling to be the one that gets to die. And Mortal Kombat is also famously battles to the death, where the winner gets some kind of great wish or gets to transcend realms. And I feel like that's a little more vague or up to interpretation with each incarnation. Now, both films focus on a main character that's pretty much original to their film. Cole in Mortal Kombat is a completely new character that I get the upsettedness, he could have just as easily been Johnny Cage or anyone else. And then Victoria for Cats, who's kind of the audience point of view character that is getting introduced to the Jellicle Cats, learning what this Jellicle ball is, and is the one they seem to be doing a lot of these songs towards. She's technically in the play, but she doesn't have any lines. She just kind of shows up and dances, and an average audience member would have no reason to know her name. So the version of Victoria we get in the film is basically an original character. Now, that whole central plot with the character is very similar between the two. Both main characters are slowly getting exposed to a world of magic that's centered around this competition to the death, with little song and dance or fight scenes to highlight what makes each member of this catalog of characters so interesting. But where things get eerily similar between the two comes down to the villain plot. So the whole thing behind this complaint about Mortal Kombat not having a Mortal Kombat tournament in it is the main villain, Shang Tsung, wants to take out all of Earthrealm's fighters before the Mortal Kombat tournament so he can win by default and take over the Earth. Macavity, the Idris Elba cat in Cats. His whole plan that we see him enacting throughout the film is to kidnap all the Jellicle cats so he can win the Jellicle Ball by default. Now, how they do this is mainly through their henchmen, maybe with some self-involvement, but this comes to our titular point of the episode. Shang Tsung uses Sub-Zero to take out or sometimes kidnap his targets throughout the film. Every time that Sub-Zero makes an appearance, you know he's coming because of the little snowflakes in the air as everything's freezing over. Like, that's his dramatic entrance. In Cats, Macavity uses Taylor Swift, who I guess is called Bumblearina, even though they almost never referenced her by name. But he uses Taylor Swift to incapacitate and kidnap his enemies one by one. And you know Taylor Swift is coming from the little flakes of catnip/ecstasy in the air as she's taking out the cats so they can kidnap old Deuteronomy. So yes, narratively, Taylor Swift and Sub-Zero are the same character in both films.
That's a perspective. That is a perspective that you've just offered up. I would add that at one point, doesn't old Deuteronomy shove other cats off of the boat like he's protecting a gate? Not unlike in Mortal Kombat when they create a gate so that the others can't come through into their world. As I recall, in the theater, when that happened, when Ian McKellen's character pushed one of those other cats off of the barge into the water, I believe someone in the theater yelled, "You shall not pass!" And the whole theater lost their frickin' minds laughing.
That was me. That was my best.
Was that you? Okay, well, that was an amazing ad lib. But I guess that there you go. Then Mortal Kombat also has a thing where they create a gate to prevent people from the outer world coming into Earth to fight them before they're ready, and then they wind up obviously using Kano to bring the gate down. So there's another little parallel I could throw in there for you.
Yeah, and you're right on the money, because the next point I have is how Raiden and Old Deuteronomy are both, like, kind of the same role. They're both emissaries to the gods, or, like, the spiritual level of their world, and the leader of their magical groups of heroes, and kind of the, like, deciding factor behind the tournament, or the one that, like, makes sure everything is going according to the book. And there's a number of other, like, small connections I can touch on. There's one important one I'll get to in a minute, but, like, Sonya Blade and Mr. Mistopheles are kind of similar. Like, they both are looking after the main character as they're introduced to the world, kind of get them out of trouble in a few scenes, and they both find their powers when they need them most right toward the end of the movie. Kung Lao, the one with the spinning sharp hat, and Skimbleshanks. They're the same because they're both objectively the best character in their movies and the person that should have won their respective competitions if it wasn't for outside interference. And then just some weaker ones like Jax and Old Gus, kind of similar. They're not the fighter they were in their prime. Kano and then Mungo Jerry and Rumpelteazer play the same role of, like, being the one that infiltrates the cats and helps them pull off the villain's plan. Goro is kind of like Growl Tiger, just the big guard one that's guarding prisoners and such. But the most important thematic and character comparison of this comes down to what both things are known most for. So, like, Cats. What's the most famous song from Cats?
Well, I assume you're going to talk about Memory.
Yeah, Memory. So Memory is sung by Grisabella the Glamour Cat. And Mortal Kombat, like, what would you say that game is most known for that sets it apart from other fighting games?
Well, I guess it depends on which generation. I mean, the very first Mortal Kombat, it was most well known for, it was motion capture, whereas all the other ones were, like, you know, animated characters still.
I hadn't thought about that, how both incorporate motion capture, so that's another thread there. But I'd say the thing that still makes it set apart from other games to this day is the gore, and specifically the fatalities in the game. Like, that's its kind of key, famous mechanic. And, like, would you agree that probably the most famous character from Mortal Kombat is Scorpion? Or at least he has, like, the most iconic imagery, the most famous line, and maybe the most famous fatality with the fire breath?
Yeah, probably. I'm very curious how you're going to tie fatalities into Cats, though.
So, Grisabella, one of the character that sings Memory, who's a big part of both the play and the film. They're like a disgraced former Jellicle cat that are denied their right to perform in the Jellicle Ball because of the villain Macavity. Scorpion is apparently now a disgraced former ninja that isn't able to fight in Mortal Kombat initially because he's taken out by Shang Tsung and Sub-Zero at the beginning of the movie. So you have both these like background characters that aren't central, but you know they're a big deal, that have just been like taken out. They don't get to be with the other fighters or performers, what have you. And then as the plot progresses and we get to the biggest emotional moment of the movie, Grisabella comes in when all of the other Jellicles have been kidnapped, delivers memory, and blows all the cats away, redeems herself, and she gets to pass on to the afterlife at the end because of it. Scorpion comes back from the dead toward the end of the movie. He gets to avenge his family by ripping off his face mask and doing his fire breath fatality, kills Sub-Zero, saves his descendants, redeems himself, and his soul gets to move on to the afterlife because of it.
But see, your argument would be a lot stronger if at some point during the movie, Grisabella tore off her own face and breathed a bunch of fire and set McCavity like into like, or if just even one cat had been, buzzsawed in half, or if one of the cats had both of their paws like frozen off and shattered. If even one of those moments had happened, I'd be like, I'm starting to see some parallels here. But I feel like your theory is missing one crucial element, which is that at no point do any cats brutally murder other cats with like a big catchphrase and fireballs. And I mean, without that, it's, there's still something missing here.
I mean, old Gus kinda does. Like, he scares that cat into the River Thames doing that "you shall not pass" moment. And, like, a cat's not gonna get itself out of there. Like, that cat probably drowned, and they just cut away before we heard its, like, death meows.
That's like the worst Mortal Kombat fatality ever. Somebody just gets randomly pushed into a river, and then it just, like, follows them gasping for air for, like, 2 minutes, and finally the fatality message comes up, and everybody's like, oh my god, finally.
But do you see my point, though, how Memory and Scorpion's fire breath fatality both play the same narrative role for their respective characters in their film, and are the thing both properties are, like, most well known for?
I mean, I'm gonna have to think on that one for a while, because I gotta be honest, you didn't just go out into left field for that one. You, like, climbed up into the stands, left the stadium, and ran over to the next city over, and you were like, hey, I got an idea, but I bet none of you have thought of it. So that's I would say that it's a little tricky there, but I applaud you for the theory, but I gotta tell you, Tommy, I'm not 100% sure that I'm gonna go with you on it.
Ouch. Well, like, dang, ever since I had this realization like a year or two ago, I've wanted to deliver this thesis in some capacity.
I'm not saying that you shouldn't deliver the thesis. I'm just saying you got to figure out how to work more fatalities into it in order for it to really be solid. In order for you to really get your PhD, you got to address the fatality issue.
Okay, actually, I think I can. At least with a brutality or something. Are you forgetting the fact that Rebel Wilson's character eats multiple living creatures with faces in her song number? Like, she's got all those cockroaches that have living people faces, and just while they are performing for her amusement, she eats them alive. That's some Mortal Kombat shit right there.
I mean, there's some validity to that, I suppose. I guess I had blocked that part from my memory. As I recall, a lot of the scenes with Rebel Wilson were just very disturbing, and I just haven't thought about them in quite some time.
I'm sorry. For those that are on the fence still about watching the film, I will say, like, at least while the movie has its bad parts, it at least gets them out of the way within the first, like, 30 minutes. Rebel Wilson and James Corden, like, those are two things I can't really defend, and I really don't want to, and at least they're done within the first 30 minutes, and from there, like, every song is better than that. The movie can only get better from this low point. But in closure here, do you at least see any of the parallels I'm getting at with, like, I find it weird that they at least went with the exact same villain plans in both movies, both from WB, both about battles to the death, and both about famous, long-running franchises and film adaptations that were largely maligned by their fans.
Well, it's funny because it starts to get into what came first, the chicken or the egg question, because, like you said, this movie of Cats did not, it didn't start development in, like, this thing dates all the way back to a Broadway musical from the early 80s. So if we're going to say that which one influenced which, did Cats influence Mortal Kombat? Did Mortal Kombat influence Cats? I don't know. So I guess that'd be my next question, is if you think that these stories are using the same elements, who copied who?
I'm not going to necessarily say anyone copied anyone, except that I wouldn't be surprised if there's some high up WB exec that just like has this weird plot that he's trying to implement in all of the movies they release, or at least like he at least got his hooks into these two before he was inevitably fired. But like it's so specific to these two incarnations that I'm not going to say the Mortal Kombat video games took from Cats nearly as much as they took from like Enter the Dragon. However, there is maybe a little bit more commonality there, because I found out after having seen this movie like 5 or 6 times, having not seen the play, that there is a superhero cat in the play, and no one told me this. Despite comic books being like my favorite thing, there's a song about Rumpus Cat, who's like a superhero that stops a dog civil war. And that seems like it could lend itself better to like this Mortal Kombat lore system. Which, speaking of, Rumpus Cat is Johnny Cage or whoever your favorite fighter that didn't make it into the movie is, because it's both the, like, weird cut parts from the movie that feel like they probably should have been in there somewhere.
I was sad that we didn't have Johnny Cage in that movie, but I did appreciate at the end the tease that we would be having him in a future sequel.
Yeah, I just didn't think he's, like, a sequel level character or like a tease level character. Like he's just a guy.
That might be, I mentioned before that they didn't need to use any star power for the first movie because they were selling it on Mortal Kombat. But it may be that for Johnny Cage, they do need to get like a big name in order for that to seem like a big enough deal.
Now, Rob, have you actually seen Cats since that initial viewing in the theater?
I saw it one additional time. Because I actually have the Blu-ray of it. And I remember I saw it again. So I did see it again. I actually used it there was a short film that I made called I Love You, Danica Patrick. It was during the pandemic. There was this, it was called the Iowa Cell Phone Film Challenge. It was something being done by like some filmmakers in the state where we were all stuck in our houses and nobody could leave or do anything and you couldn't make anything. And so they came up with this idea that every week they would have a contest where you make a movie, but the limits were you could only use your cell phone because otherwise the filmmakers who have all kinds of crazy good equipment at home would have an unfair advantage. So like you could only use a phone and you could only use as cast members and crew people who were sheltering in place with you. Obviously, if you figured out a way to use Zoom, then you could incorporate people that way, but you couldn't otherwise. And so I made this movie. And it was called, it basically just completely starred cats. All the cats that lived in my house. And it was called I Love You, Danica Patrick. And it was all about one cat's attempts to woo this other cat named Danica Patrick, who actually was our cat. And it culminates with Max, the cat that's trying to win Danica, decides to try and impress her by getting hold of the movie Cats and putting it on. And so so they're watching it, and Danica gets so offended by the how cats are being portrayed in this film that she proceeds to beat the crap out of Max for showing her this movie. And so in order to do that, I got a hold of the Blu-ray, and so I saw it again for that reason. And also my wife had not gone with us to the theater, so I let her watch some of it. And I believe I almost got beaten in a similar fashion to how Danica beats Max. Because why are you making me watch this? But it was, I still, after, seeing it a second time, I was like, the things that I didn't like about it, I still really didn't like about it. But I was like, visually, there's some cool stuff going on. And again, like I said, I appreciated that the filmmakers really swung for the fences and really had a crazy vision and stuck to it. And I don't know, I haven't seen it in a couple of years, and I wouldn't mind revisiting it. And the fact that it's coming to Netflix might be a good excuse to do that. But I mean, I have definitely softened my feeling on the film over the years. Not nearly to the degree you have, but certainly to some degree I have. And I mean, it is an acquired taste, I suspect. But yeah, worth revisiting. I will say, I'll put in a pitch, and I will put a pitch for this movie. Because there are those movies that you have that you consider like a flawed masterpiece. Like there's things about it that are so brilliant. And then there's other things about it where you're like, oh no, why did you choose to do that? No. And it makes you reluctant to recommend it to somebody because you're like, I don't want them to think that I thought the terrible thing that this movie did was a good idea, but oh my God, this other stuff that it did was so amazing. And one of those movies for me is Cloud Atlas. I don't know if you've seen it, but
yeah, I saw that for the first time this last year.
I mean, there is some absolutely brilliant stuff going on in that movie. And then there are also choices they make where I'm like, why? Why did you just do that? No! But I have watched that movie many times because I'm like, there's an absolute masterpiece inside of this movie. I wish I could take a couple of things out of it to make it perfect, but the stuff that's in it that I like so darn much. And so that's, you know, there was an anime series called Elfen Lied that I felt that way about too. It was that there's a few animes that are like that, where they do absolutely brilliant stuff, and then there's some scene involving kids and animals, and you're like, oh God, no! Why did you just do that? I can't recommend this movie now. Elfen Lied has like a few scenes in it that are awful, and like I would be worried if I recommended it that people would look at me like, oh my God, you find this entertaining? But there's also moments of sheer beauty in that anime. And so I always do find it interesting when you have one of those movies that it's like, I like so many things about this. And then there's other stuff that just drives me crazy. And I have this weird, unique fascination with this movie as a result, because sometimes I see the movie that I wish it was. And then other times I'm like, why did you do this? So that's that. And I don't know, maybe on another viewing of Cats, I will see some of the things that I'm like, oh, that's actually really, really cool. So why did you do this other thing? Why is James Corden here? You know, things like, yeah, because yeah, there's definitely some cool stuff that's happening in that movie.
Yeah, what's weird is after I showed this movie to a girlfriend, she managed to one-up me on weird cat film media that like trumped Cats in this regard, and a lot of what you were saying as well. It's, I believe, a 90s animated film called Felidae from the same studio that did like the Watership Down animated movie.
Yeah, well, I remember Watership Down, and that thing was nuts. But I think I've heard of Felidae, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's like a really gritty, like noir crime story that just happens to be about house cats, and they're not like anthropomorphized walking around in a cat society with cat detectives. It's just like a couple house cats that are solving a mystery regarding like kind of Nazi-esque cats and some kind of like special like super Felidae species. And I describe it as like Seven meets Oliver and Company, but it might be more brutal than Seven. Like, it has one of those moments that I'm like, oh my God, they just showed what's in the box, literally. And like, it's brutal. And this movie was like lost media for a number of years, or at least the English translation of it was. And like, I can kind of see why, but otherwise I thought it was still like a really fascinating movie and an interesting watch. Just like, I'd never seen other animated movies go quite this dark despite being about talking animals.
Yeah, no, I don't know it, but no, I'll have to check that out now. Do you know, is it streaming anywhere?
I believe you can find it on YouTube. Like one of those weird ones that's so obscure that like no one's getting uppity about the rights about it.
Okay.
But on that note of like seeing the better movie inside of it, the question of the week that I had prepared for this week was to either see if you could pitch a better version of Cats, or if you don't want to go that route for like kind of being critical of artwork, like to know what other play you would like to see get the Cats treatment.
Let's be clear. When you say the Cats treatment, do you mean a stage musical made into a movie, or do you mean a stage musical given the Cats treatment?
I think I mean the Cats treatment, or at least like a weird CGI adaptation, or like something that's like taking a big swing with a weird musical.
Gosh. You know, I'm sure that I would think of something. I imagine if they could get the rights from Dr. Seuss, from his estate, I imagine that Seussical the musical in full-blown animated CGI form would have a lot of potential to be really, really insane.
I like to think in a nearby parallel world, instead of Cats getting this treatment, it was instead Starlight Express that like instead got turned to like a bunch of monstrous CGI singing trains and a big box office disaster. But like, I would love to see Starlight Express get this treatment, or any of the other like weird catalog of characters musicals like this I found. Like I guess 6 kind of fits the bill, but more so Monster Songs, which I saw locally in Iowa City, and is kind of the same vibe as Cats.
Okay. I suppose you could also go pretty crazy with this. It's funny, these all have come back to Andrew Lloyd Webber, but you could probably go pretty crazy with a hardcore CGI version of Phantom of the Opera. But only if you agreed to make it as absolutely batshit insane as possible. If you do just like a straight up adaptation, boring, been done. But if you made it really, really crazy, that might be worth checking out.
You gotta tie in the sequel for it, or like maybe make it a wild CGI Love Never Dies.
Yeah.
Because that's a swing. I don't think anyone else would do that, but someone with the gumption and the budget should.
I agree. I'm not so sure that anyone should do that, but Elon Musk has a lot of money and clearly is willing to just do really weird stuff with it if he gets high enough. So maybe that's our path to more Cats movies getting made, is convincing Elon Musk that it needs to be done.
Now, I'm bummed about American copyright law because, like, having seen Cats so much, there is a better film that I have in my mind that I construct a little more every time I see it. And if Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats was in the public domain in the US, I would totally turn this into like a webcomic or something. And if I ever have to flee the country to Canada, I can put that plan to work because I know it's in the public domain in Canada.
Well, the book's been around for a long time. I mean, Mickey Mouse, the Steamboat Willie just came into the public domain. How much longer before T.S. Eliot's book gets out?
I think it might be like in the 2030s. I Googled it a couple months ago just to answer this exact question.
Well, it takes a long time to develop a musical anyway, so maybe you get started on it now, and by the time you've got it where you want it, the copyright is expired.
I'm just kind of surprised with some of the obvious swings they didn't take with this. Like, with Memory being the center of the musical and the thing it's most known for, like, I feel like they could have done something really interesting in doing, like, an intergenerational depiction of Cats, maybe actually making it Grisabella's story. Like, what if we got to see more than one version of, like, Skimbleshanks, or we do get to see old Gus performing in his prime, or, like, a different version of the Gumby cat that isn't, like, exploiting mice and cockroaches so much, but actually trying to, like, elevate them into cat society.
I argued in my Cats review several years ago that there should be an Andrew Lloyd Webber shared cinematic universe. That we need a movie about dogs, and we need, a whole lot. So I think there's room in there for some of those ideas. But I'm all for us spreading this out MCU style.
Like, personally, I'd love them to see them just go real sci-fi with this. Maybe tap into some of that Starlight Express, but, like, maybe we find out the origins of the Jellicle choice. Like, that's what I think the movie needs to hinge on. The Jellicle choice needs to matter. Like, maybe we find out a bunch of old Victorian-era rich guys did some kind of summoning ritual for some sort of eldritch angel alien creature, and the most worthy person in the room got to make the wish with this creature, but someone had their beloved cat in the room, and that's where cat society originates. Is that one, like, first incarnation of Old Deuteronomy wished cats a better life, and now they can sing and dance and walk on their hind legs and stuff. And we build everything out of this, make some kind of space opera out of it. I've had a few high tangents about this, as you can maybe tell.
I bet James Wan could do something with this concept, and there we go. We bring Mortal Kombat and Cats together once again.
Yeah, and I think I can even see the two crossing over. Like, I want to see the champion of Cat Realm come in, because, like, I think Mr. Mistopheles or Skimbleshanks could hold their own as a Mortal Kombat fighter. Might be a little tough, but I don't know, with that dragon magic, they could. I'd love to know what their fatality is.
I do not disagree. I would absolutely love to see a cat fatality, and I hope it involves flaming hairballs.
That'll be the James Corden one.
No, don't ruin it.
But, Rob, bringing things to a close here, where can my listeners find you in the future if they want to follow your writing and other endeavors?
I'm old, so I'm on Facebook. Yeah, I honestly, I've not really gotten on any other platforms. I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on Twitter/X. I definitely not on TikTok or any of those. But if you look me up, facebook.com/madreindeer, that's where you'll find me. And that's pretty much it.
Well, thank you, Rob, for joining me on one of my strangest episodes yet. I'm really glad I could grab you for this, and it's been nice getting a little epilogue to that Cats piece you wrote all those years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy. I can't believe that thing's still alive.
If the listeners at home have requests or recommendations for content you'd like us to cover in the future, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us on the Giant Sized Violence Facebook page, on Twitter is @UltraMegaCast, or email us at giantsizedviolence@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you for giving our podcast a chance and give a special shout out to artists Ray Day Parade and Dark Moon Home Video for designing our logo and cover photos. Our intro and outro music this week is You're an Ace Kid by DEMONDICE from their album Alcatraz. You can check out their new EP, Shut Up Get Happy, on iTunes and Spotify. We hope you join us again next time as we return to exploring the world of tokusatsu comics. But until then, take care and remember to do your part in preventing the spread of the kaiju virus.
Freedom can't be seen by downcast eyes. So raise your gaze up till your 10 feet tall and shake your fist to the sky. Refuse to die or let them make you small, cause they love just to see you convinced you're just a brick in the wall. But you're not just a brick in the wall. La da 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 da.